In this section, we want to discuss the Calvin cycle. This is the second stage of photosynthesis. Now, just like the Krebs cycle was named for Hans Krebs, the Calvin cycle is named for Melvin Calvin. This is yet another Nobel Prize that was awarded for work done related to respiration or photosynthesis. Melvin Calvin received the Nobel Prize for this work in the early 60s for determining the process of carbon fixation in photosynthesis. Obviously, photosynthesis is ultimately important to all life on Earth, and so this was considered worthy of Nobel Prize. Now, just like the light-dependent reaction is the photo portion of photosynthesis, this is the synthesis portion of photosynthesis. And of course, when you synthesize something, you make something. So what is being synthesized here, or what is being made, is the carbohydrates. So this process occurs in the stroma. The light-dependent reaction occurred on the thylakoid within the chloroplast. This occurs in the stroma, which is the fluid portion of the chloroplast. And during the Calvin cycle, carbon fixation occurs. Carbon fixation is conversion of inorganic carbon dioxide to organic carbon. And basically, think of it as taking carbon in the form of a gas, which is just floating around freely, and it fixes it. It affixes it. It sticks it into place. It turns it into a solid. Okay, let's look at the diagram here and notice what happens during the Calvin cycle. We're going to have carbon dioxide enter this Calvin cycle. Carbon dioxide is going to be picked up by a compound here called ribulose biphosphate. Big old long name. And ribulose biphosphate has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carbons, picks up carbon dioxide and makes a 6-carbon compound, which immediately forms a 3-carbon compound. So this part of the cycle is called the carbon uptake phase. The next part of the cycle is the carbon reduction phase. And during the carbon reduction phase, hydrogens that were collected from the water are going to be added onto these intermediate compounds. Right there's hydrogens from the water. I'm going to add those on, and we're going to use the ATP that was formed by photophosphorylation to rearrange these intermediate compounds. And then this winds up producing carbohydrate that we've seen before called glyceraldehyde phosphate. We saw glyceraldehyde phosphate as an intermediate in glycolysis. Most of this glyceraldehyde phosphate will end up as glucose. So frequently in a reaction we'll say that glucose is the end product of photosynthesis, although the direct end product is right here, glyceraldehyde phosphate. Now, since this is a cycle, we have to get back to where we started. So we're going to rearrange these intermediate compounds. We're going to use some more ATP that was produced by photophosphorylation to rearrange this and get back to that ribulose biphosphate that can then again pick up carbon dioxide. Okay, so a summary of what happens in this Calvin cycle is the Calvin cycle is going to use ATP, and ATP provides the energy that ATP came from the light-dependent reaction. It is also going to use NADPH. This is going to provide hydrogen, and like the ATP, the NADPH came from the light-dependent reaction, and this process of the Calvin cycle uses carbon dioxide. Now, the Calvin cycle produces ADP plus phosphate that will return to the light-dependent reaction. It produces NADP, the hydrogen carrier, in its oxidized form, which will return to the light-dependent reaction in order to pick up more hydrogen. And it produces the carbohydrates, which is the entire goal of this process. Okay, just a note here that the direct end product of the Calvin cycle is glyceraldehyde phosphate. Most of that glyceraldehyde phosphate is converted into 6-carbon sugars such as glucose and fructose, but the glyceraldehyde phosphate can also feed into metabolic pathways that lead to things like fatty acids, amino acids, and other simple organic molecules. Also, recall that glyceraldehyde phosphate is an intermediate in glycolysis, back in respiration. Now then, as just a point of interest, notice that 10 of the 13 enzymes in the Calvin cycle are also found in glycolysis. So we have a lot of similarity here between these two processes. These reactions involving these enzymes are concentration driven, reversible reactions, and so these two reactions are sort of the reverse of each other. Glycolysis is a process of breaking down carbohydrates. Calvin cycle is a process of manufacturing or synthesizing these carbohydrates.